Our recording. Well, welcome to the Grand Rounds of the Air discussion for today for the Medical Amateur Radio Council. We're talking about St. Patrick's Day, and it's celebrated, as everyone knows, annually on March 17th. It's kind of hard to escape that in the American persona here culturally. It's such an omnipresent holiday during March, and it's actually celebrating or recognizing the anniversary of St. Patrick's death in the 5th century. And the Irish have observed this day as a religious holiday for over 1,000 years. And St. Patrick's Day, it happens to fall during the Christian season of Lent. And we had discussions recently. I know N5RTF was in one of these discussions as we talked about Holy and Easter and other springtime holidays. So in a way, it's not directly a springtime holiday in the way of the colors of spring, but it was at that time during Lent that Irish families would traditionally attend church in the morning and they would celebrate in the afternoon. And since your prohibition in Lent against the consumption of meat was present, they would waive that for the day, and people would dance, drink, and feast on traditional meat of Irish bacon and cabbage. So the source of this particular information, much of what I'm reading, this particular one is from history.com. And if you just look up under topics St. Patrick's Day, the history of St. Patrick's Day, you can read more about it. But in the centuries following St. Patrick's death at the time, which was believed to be on March 17th, 493, the mythology about his life became ever more ingrained in the Irish cultures. Perhaps the most well-known legend of St. Patrick is his explanation of the Holy Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, using the 3 leaves of a native Irish clover, the shamrock. So as one can see, we have our symbolism here, and the symbolism is ingrained in our own culture here in the United States, and of course, with our many residents of Irish origin, that's no great surprise. We all enjoy these holidays. Just my note, that part of our American culture is transformed into a cultural celebration. Those religious origins just don't seem to be the longer the primary driving force. A very commercial success holidays, many holidays have become, and think about the saying of there's no Christmas without Christ. I mean, we tend to embrace these holidays and make them cultural phenomena, not to deter from their origins. We do need to recognize that and celebrate that as well. And what about Ireland here from a health standpoint and a medical standpoint? What's of interest? We'll talk about that in just a second here as we explore both the potato famine and the pharmacology industry. But being this is a net and a roundtable discussion, I'd like to take a list of those that you would like to make comments or talk about St. Patrick's Day in your neighborhoods. And let me pause one and take on the HF side a request for discussion. Make your call to Whiskey Bravo 5 Delta. Jeff, WW9F, are you still with us, Jeff? Go ahead.
Yes, I am, Jay, and I'd be happy to talk about the St. Patrick's Day traditions in the city of Chicago. If you would like me to do that now, please let me know.
Oh, yes, I would. From the many times I've been in Chicago, it's a very multicultural city. So you get the joy of celebrating all the different cultures. Tell us about St. Patrick's Day. Go ahead.
Well, St. Patrick's Day involves really the entire weekend, this weekend, and what we experience are a couple of events. First, the dyeing of the Chicago River running through the route bright green. The Plumbers Union supervises the event, and plumber's dye is dumped into the Chicago River. We were told that it is harmless and we dissipate eventually. And it is a sight to behold.
Oh, okay. USL. So you're telling me they're using leak detection dye? Is that correct?
Day downtown in the Loop area. We also have the South Side Irish Parade and the Northwest Side Irish Parade. There's a substantial Irish community in the city of Chicago and its suburbs, but around St. Patty's Day, the Irish population seems to expand by a factor of at least tenfold. Also, what becomes part of the tradition is the consumption of vast volumes of beer. And that becomes evident, unfortunately, in too many ways, some of them not really fortunate at all. And the hospital emergency rooms have to be prepared for the aftermath. So it tends to be a fairly boisterous, loud, very crowded event, bringing a lot of people into the city. Yesterday we had very warm temperatures, approaching 70 degrees, maybe higher, but strongly 60 miles per hour gusts. Today, the temperature is taking a nosedive, and as I'm speaking, we are experiencing snow showers. That's not unusual for this time of year here. And that pretty much sums up the experience of St. Patrick's or St. Patty's Day in the Chicago area. Back to this is WW9F.
Oh, yeah. That's wonderful. Thank you for the report, Jeff. I'm sorry I doubled with you for just a moment there, but we got the gist of it. It was a very short doubling. So, the first Irish coffee I ever had was actually in Chicago. The place was called Jay's on Rush Street. And, I just out of curiosity is the plumber's green dye, is that a leak detection dye over?
Well, yes, it is. It's used by plumbers to really search for leaks and to treat water pipes generally. And so it's routinely used, although not in the quantities used to dye an entire river green. WW9F.
Okay, that's very interesting. So it's the Chicago River. Something tells me about the Chicago River. Isn't that one of the few rivers, but the river actually, which direction does the water flow from the lake? Something tells me that was opposite the way it usually happens. Over.
That's correct. The flow of the river was reversed to prevent contamination of Lake Michigan, which serves as the drinking water source for Chicago and its suburbs. And through a series of actually engineering marvel in its day, the series of locks approaching the lake was used to reverse the flow so it flows downstream, and so that things like the beautiful color of green can be visited upon our friends further south, eventually in New Orleans.
Oh, well, thank you for the description. We appreciate that. I've been on tours of the river before, but just remembering all those details, I appreciate you refreshing my memory there. For ID purposes, this is Whiskey Bravo 5 Delta, the Medical Amateur Radio Council, Grand Rounds of the Internet. As you can tell, we're talking about St. Patrick's Day. We're going to momentarily talk about more of the medically related topics related to some of the history of Ireland. But we'd like to hear more about St. Patrick's Day in particular cities. Is there anybody on the Zoom side that would like to have a discussion about that? Go ahead and let me know. Okay, Mary, A4BX, if you why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your St. Patrick's Day?
Well, I've been to the St. Patrick's Day celebration in Savannah, which is a great celebration. They close schools in Savannah in honor of the holiday. And, but, all the stores close except the bars. So if you wanted to do any Savannah shopping, forget it. The only thing open is bars. and everybody's drunk. And, and it's a great getaway for college kids, a lot of college kids down there. But their parade is not very innovative. You'll have a big flatbed full of people, and somebody holds a sign that says O'Connor. And then the next flatbed full of people, somebody holds a sign that says Murphy. It isn't really creative at all. I was rather disappointed in it, really. But anyway, they color the river green, and everybody sings and dances and has a good time anyway. So.
Thank you for the description, Mary. That's AE4BX with us. He's been to the Savannah celebrations. Mary, I've never been there for the parade, but I have been. They used to have an Irish festival as well, and that was more for the businesses and commercial. They had it in the convention center. It's the only place I've ever been where they actually solicited me and wanted me to put on a survivalist kilt. The survivalist kilt was made out of leather and had chains and, of course, commando, and I wasn't going to volunteer to wear it. It's very interesting. That one really had a lot of commercialism to it. So Chip is with us, M5RTF, and Chip, not that we need to comment, but I just want to mention that Chip recently had a discussion on Mardi Gras on one of our nets. In Mardi Gras, we were talking about some of the stressors that were involved in holiday celebrations, and Mary alluded to vast quantities of alcohol, and of course Jeff also alluded to the celebrations. So anybody that's related in health-related fields realizes that there are issues, because even when individuals don't have an overt, obvious illness, if they have a tendency towards that may arise during a time of stress, alcohol, in Mardi Gras case, the heat and humidity, not so much in Chicago, or Savannah in March, maybe not so much either, certainly not New Orleans style. So we're talking about medical problems that can arise. We're going to talk a little. Yes.
I'll add a little bit about New Orleans. We have a very large Irish population in New Orleans. They were brought in as indentured servants back in the 1800s. And there are thousands of Irish immigrants buried along the boundary between Orleans and Jefferson Parish, where they were used to dig a canal from the river to the lake. And they developed yellow fever, and so many died that they just put the bodies in the levee and kept right on building. So that's memorialized as a national cemetery. The city itself has a section known as the Irish Channel. It's on the river side of the Garden District, and has lots of bars, lots of restaurants, and lots of Irish culture. And they have a big St. Patrick's Day celebration with, as you might imagine, floats and beads, and they throw cabbages and carrots and potatoes, so that people, if they bring bags with them, and they catch the vegetables and go home and make a big stew out of it. So it's a big holiday in New Orleans.
And 5RTF, Jim. That's a very colorful description. I'm sitting here chuckling so much that I made the Zoom recording, put my video on for a second. Now, Chip, isn't there also, though, an English bayou? What's that all about? I mean, an Irish bayou.
There is an Irish bayou, which is about 2 miles from where I live. It goes from Bayou Sauvage, takes a right turn up Irish Bayou, and ends up in Lake Pontchartrain. And it's a good fishing area, and there's some stores and other things up at the point where the bridges go across the lake on the far east side. But yeah, it's, again, the Irish culture is, goes way back in New Orleans.
Thank you, Chip. You just mentioned that was M5RTF with Whiskey Bravo 5 Delta for ID purposes. This is AA4FL at the mic, and our transmissions originating out of Hawthorne, Florida. All amateurs are welcome to participate, by the way. So in a moment, I'll pause for additional check-ins. That's all we ask if you're going to be in the roundtable discussions we do need you to check in. But, Chip, you brought something up that I really hadn't thought about before, and that's the Irish immigrants in the South, because so much, well, maybe, the movies and culture and some of the talk so much about Civil War era and history and the Irish immigration during that time and affecting American culture from the conscription in the army and overwhelming manpower. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too. Do we have any additional check-ins? Those of you here in HF would like to be involved in this discussion, don't have to be a Marco member. We're open to all amateurs. Make your call to Whiskey Bravo 5 Delta. We're going to move on to talk about the potato famine, and some of the information here is also on history.com. If you look up the topics of the Irish potato famine. So it was also known as the Great Hunger. It began in 1845 there in Ireland, when a mold known as Phytophthora infestans caused a destructive plant disease that spread quickly throughout Ireland. And we'll discuss more about that here today. The infestation ruined up to 1/2 of the potato crop that year, about 3/4 of the crop over the next 7 years. And because the tenant farmers of Ireland then ruled as a colony of Great Britain, they relied heavily on the potato as a source of food, and the infestation had a catastrophic impact on Ireland and its population. So I think we're all familiar from grade school and middle school knowing about the potato famine. We'll talk about a little bit more details because there's things that I found in doing the research that I was not aware of. But before it ended in 1852, it resulted in death of roughly 1 million Irish from starvation and related causes. As we know, starvation weakens your immune system, and other causes then can take advantage of that opportunity. And with at least another million forced to leave their homeland as refugees because they didn't have food. So here, the personal note here, as I was reading through this, is think of the effect on immigration to the U.S., the effect of the outcome. The Civil War is the example I just mentioned, Chip, and I didn't even start to think about the South. I was thinking more about the North and also the concerns of the time. There had been anti-Catholic sentiment, and you can even compare that, not that this is a political discussion, nor we want it to be misconstrued, with the current legal and illegal immigration of other groups during contemporary times, with potential ramifications on the political level and the impacts of the change in way of life. So the reason why I mention that, think about St. Patrick's Day now. It's ingrained in our own culture. So over time, perceptions change, and we, as we mentioned, Chicago being multicultural. I enjoy going to Chicago just from a culinary standpoint. You've got every culture you can think of in its own neighborhood and its own food. It's a wonderful time to be had there. So how did the infection shape history, the lessons from the Irish famine? And this is taken from more of an article of a traditional medical background. By the late 17th century, the potato was widely used in Ireland to supplement the main diet of dairy and grain products. And over time, those Irish tenants were pushed off the better land and forced to farm smaller plots of marginal land, and increasingly they turned to the potato because it was a crop that could be grown abundantly in less favorable soil. It was sufficiently nutritious to provide general sustenance. But by the first 2 decades of the 18th century, it really become the base food for the poor, and most of the potatoes grown in Ireland, unfortunately, were of a single variety. And that obviously is a big problem. It was the Irish lumper, and holdings were so small that no crop other than potatoes would suffice to feed a family. People were that poor. And by 1841, there were more than 500,000 peasant farmers with 1.75 million dependents. And that combination, and the British government actually reported in 1843 that poverty was as widespread that 1/3 of all Irish small holdings could not support their families after paying their rent, except by earnings of seasonal migrant labor in England and Scotland. But where was the potato blight actually first reported? And this I was not aware of. The earliest reports were actually in the United States, Philadelphia and New York City, according to this source. in early 1843, 2 years before Ireland, caused by that same fungus, which spread rapidly in the foliage of potatoes, causing collapse and decay of the plant. And the disease spreads most rapidly during periods of warm and humid weather with rain. It's assumed, according to this article, that winds then spread the spores. By 1845, potato blight was found across the eastern part of the United States and Canada, and then crossed the Atlantic, probably with a shipment of seed potatoes from Belgian farmers in 1845. And all the potato grown countries in Europe were affected, and by year's end, the disease had spread throughout Belgium and Holland into an area from northern Spain to the southern tip of Scandinavia and east to Italy. And of course, then, as we know, Ireland, it moved through the British Isles and reached Ireland's west coast. And by mid-October 1845, the ruin of Europe's potato crops was complete, including Ireland, with the potato blight hit it the hardest. Disproportionate dependency on the Irish lumper, that single variety we talked about, and the lack of genetic variability in the Irish potato population created susceptible host population for the organism. And there's many, many more research studies that you can look at, including genetic studies of the spread. Just look on PubMed and you'll find that. Let's pause for a moment here. First, this is ID Whiskey Bravo 5 Delta, the Medical Amateur Radio Council Grand Rounds in the Internet. So I'm not an agronomist. Do we have anyone on HF that would like to add some additional information that you're familiar with? Make your call to Whiskey Bravo 5 Delta and we will make a list. Okay, no comments on the HF side. On the Zoom side, is there anybody who would like to make some comments on the agronomy of the situation? We know. Okay, the University of Florida here, and today's the big basketball game for Bobby and I, W1BW, coming up here in about an hour. But we have buildings in every county in the state because there's agricultural institution too, and usually that's the Institute of Agriculture. That I should have brought a specialist from IFAS in here today to talk about this if we really wanted to get scientific. As we talk about topics, and generally we do this and we have this forum discussion on HF. And as we talk about these topics, you find more and more discussion threads to be had. So if you have a particular aspect about today that you would like to have discussed in more detail in another session of the Grand Rounds in the Air, don't hesitate in emailing me. My personal call is AA4FL, Alpha 4 Fox Lima, and my email address is on my QRZ page. Never hesitate in writing me with recommendations, feedback. In addition, check out the QRZ page for Whiskey Bravo 5 Delta. That's the club call for the Medical Amateur Radio Council. And you can also look at healthcarehams.org. What about medical issues emanating from the potato famine? Actually, starvation. You can go to historyireland.com where they covered this quite succinctly. So the famine can be defined as a failure of food production or distribution, resulting in dramatically increased mortality. In Ireland, between 1845 and 1849, general starvation and disease were responsible for more than 1 million excess deaths, and most of them attributable to fever, dysentery, and smallpox. So we can put that in a modern context when we talk about recently the COVID-19 pandemic. What are people dying from? Are you dying from the pandemic? Are you dying from the potato famine? How do you quantify the people that die? Well, it seems that excess deaths is a decent meter to look at because those many people prior to it did not die, and that's how they evaluated it. But the three highly contagious diseases that had long been endemic in Ireland swept the country epidemically with great malignancy during those years, malignity. The destructiveness was intensified by the presence of other epidemic infections, of other opportunistic infections, things like tuberculosis, bronchitis, influenza, pneumonia, diarrhea, measles. Think about the stressors that are involved with starvation. For example, when we talked about Mardi Gras, the emergency rooms being busy because of the stressors, the stressors to the human body, put it in situations it cannot deal with. Now you have people that are malnourished being exposed to the same diseases. Perhaps they were able to fight those diseases before, but you get to the point when you can't. So what else unfortunately happened in Ireland? In 1848 to 1849, Asiatic cholera exacerbated its situation, and a fearsome disease added to the physical and mental suffering of the beleaguered population and increased the overall mortality. Does anyone have anything they would like to add to this particular from a medical standpoint? Make your call to Whiskey Bravo 5 Delta on HF, not start on this. Okay, anything from our experts that are coming in through Zoom? Would I like to talk about malnutrition and diseases? I know we have some emergency room docs on board here today. Do we have anyone that would like to make comments? Please let me know. Well, I'm either going to take that as a compliment that we're covering the situation adequately, but I'm certainly know that I lean on our friends here, our other Marco members, and in advance to create these dialogues. So thank you to everyone. You know, it was interesting. I ran across an article in doing research on irishcentral.com in their news where they talked about the famine mental illness connection. I hadn't really thought about that. I mean, you know, mental illness, and maybe Chip can comment about this here in just a minute, N5RTF. But mental illness takes a toll. How long does it take its toll? Well, there's a historian, not a doctor. The historian believes that the Great Hunger, the potato famine that is, triggered a higher rate of mental illness among longer generations, both those who stayed in Ireland and those who emigrated, both. And he said in Science Week event, 2013, that a severe nutritional deprivation between 1845 and 1850 caused epidemic change. And that's outside of my realm of strength. I'll have Chip make some comments momentarily, but epigenetics is a study of changes in gene expression, not necessarily changes in the genetic code, but effects may persist for several generations. And this particular historian estimated that the impact of the epigenetic changes from the Great Hunger would last for a century and a half. N5RTF, would you like to make some comments? We turn the mic over to you.
Yeah, this is N5RTF. Epigenetics is a new field. It's the idea pre-Darwin that the environment can actually affect the structure and function of succeeding generations of any species. And there is truth to that. A species that's subjected to starvation, the next couple of generations will be smaller and eat less, require less food than the previous generations. If you look at what's happened in the United States, when I was a teenager, I was average height. Now I'm short. But my parents went through the Depression. They were children during the Great Depression. So their children, the boomers, were mainly smaller than most people now. And now, as with unlimited food supplies, people just keep getting taller and taller. Another thing about the Irish, in the South in particular, and I'm part Irish, I'm about 5-6% Irish by DNA. They came in through the East Coast and came across the hill country, but a lot of them came in by ship. And in New Orleans in the South, they were used for the worst types of labor. As I mentioned, digging canals in mosquito-infested swamps. They fished and did heavy labor in horrible conditions. Because frankly, they were cheaper than slaves. The slaves were valuable. The Irish would work for food and whiskey. So there were tens of thousands of Irish that came to the United States only to die of overuse and abuse before they got a foothold. And that made them tougher and a lot more clannish than some other groups. And they dug in, and if you notice, the Irish would find a niche where they could do, like the fire department or the police department or bars, restaurants that they could thrive in, and then they would help their succeeding generations, and so they would not have to go back to digging ditches. N5RTF.
Thank you, Chip. N5RTF, AA4FL to Mike for Whiskey Bravo 5 Delta. Thank you for that description. I think we can see parallels there with many immigrant societies here in the United States. At hotels, convenience stores, or a lot of people from the Indian subcontinent finding that niche. They're part of the American dream, working their way up and installing with each subsequent generation an improvement in life. And Chip, I don't know if I mentioned it to you before, my grandfather snuck in illegally through Cuba in the late teens, early 20s, through New Orleans. That's where he finally successfully got on land. He's gotten caught with the keys prior to that and sent back. So I wouldn't be here to have this discussion today if it wasn't for New Orleans. So, and I still have family in New Orleans. As you know, I have quite a bit of family in the South. So the misconception that all people of Jewish origin live in the Northeast, that is a misconception. Historically, actually, the synagogues were extremely extensive and popular in the South, and there was a huge merchant class as well. Again, people looking for that niche that they can fill based upon the historic experiences. So we hope that having these discussions here on the Medical Amateur Radio Council Grand Rounds of the Air is helpful to all amateurs. And we do encourage you all to participate. So I'm going to pause here for any late check-ins, but also for those that would like to be involved in the roundtable discussion. The only additional area I want to discuss is pharmacology, the industry in Ireland. Let's pause here for some check-ins. Make your call to Whiskey Bravo 5 Delta for check-ins and comments. Okay, I'm not hearing any additional, but the pharmacology industry in Ireland, and I guess I knew about in a roundabout way because one of our cousins worked in the pharmacology industry, and she was over in Cork all the time working on projects. The brain trust for the industry there, and it has one of the biggest pharmaceutical industries in Europe. There's so many pharmaceutical companies in Ireland that it's close to 24 of the world's biggest multinational pharma companies. And 11 of the 12 biggest pharma companies in the world are in Ireland. Not that they're exclusively in Ireland, but J&J, Novartis, Pfizer, that type. Regeneron and on and on. You can pull that list online. So if you go to farmchoices.com and look for pharmaceutical companies in Ireland, if you will Google that, you can get more detail. So even with a population of just 4.5 million people, Ireland has a well-advanced pharma sector, and different local pharma and about 120 international pharma companies exist in the country. That's only a 4.5 million person country. There's so many. This particular article may have been a little older. It's possible this one of the ones I used was 2008. I'm not sure where these statistics come from. There are so many pharmaceutical companies in Ireland. Why? There's a low corporate tax rate, 12.5%, 25% tax credit on research and development, at least the time this was written. It's a perfect incentive for pharmaceutical companies to go to Ireland. And the skilled labor force is also available. Ireland MedTech is the highest employer in Europe, with 25,000 direct jobs and 25,000 indirect jobs. The pharmaceutical and biotechnology sector employs similar numbers. The pharmaceutical industry in Ireland being advanced, it employs the latest in technology and adheres to strict manufacturing processes. And the companies in England account for the largest export of pharmaceuticals in the EU, with 50% of exports from the zone. So you can see that they're in the EU and they have to follow the standards of the EU, which tend to be very strict. So think about that just in terms, my perception is, isn't it an irony that a country that was so poor and dependent on others back during the 1800s, where they were dependent to a high degree on what was going on in Britain, is now a popular location for so many industries, including pharmaceutical production, pharmacology, changes that led to the success. Think about that. Global commerce is now possible. Connected world exists, but you also have that educated and motivated workforce. And one other aspect that I found a little quirky is that,
N5RTF.
go ahead, Chip, N5RTF. Let's get some.
Yeah, they have low rates of litigation as well.
I hadn't thought about that, Chip. Thank you. That would obviously be a very big factor. Chip, you know, the mores of Ireland have changed over time, being a Catholic country, and now birth control and conception was as well. But one thing that I ran into was, and from what I remember, is that there a lot of the research, development, production, I think from memory, was birth control pills there in that country. Do you know anything more about that, Chip, N5RTF?
No, I really don't. The biggest form of birth control traditionally in Ireland is that men didn't get married until their late 30s. So that would keep the generations far apart. That probably has changed as well. But yeah, it's become a secular country. I don't know if that's to its advantage though. N5RTF.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I'm sorry to put you on the spot that way. Is there anybody else that would like to comment about that particular topic? Go ahead and make your call to Whiskey Bravo 5 Delta. Mary, A4BX, we'll start with you.
Yes, I'm half Irish. My Irish great-grandparents emigrated shortly after the potato famine and got their way to Wisconsin, where they were farmers. It's interesting in that Irish are either heavy drinkers or they're absolute teetotalers. And my grandparents were teetotalers. You could not have a drop of anything anywhere in the house ever, because I guess the propensity would just be to become drunks. But my mother's favorite thing was to hide the wine to soak the claws for fruitcakes at Christmas time. And so she would furtively go to the drugstore and buy a bottle of wine and pour it immediately into a mason jar and hide it in several bags deep in the cupboard. And of course, my sister and I, our project would be to find that and then taste the wine periodically. Because it was, but they became farmers, and a lot of them immigrated to Wisconsin, and small southern Wisconsin. And the Norwegians came there too. My father was from the Norwegian community. My mother was from the Irish. But then I married an Italian who they hated all Irish. And so some relatives would not even come to the wedding. The Irish wouldn't come and some of the Italians wouldn't come because the Irish knew the Italians were going to be drinking wine and all this sort of forbidden stuff. So, but the birth control kind of came along with the Catholic Church when you were not supposed to have any kind of birth control, just procreate indiscriminately. And there were a lot of other things that went on at that time. You know, my father couldn't be buried next to my mother because he left the Catholic Church, so he couldn't be buried in the Catholic cemetery, so he's in another town. Nobody would even pay attention to that anymore. But that, the Catholicism was rife with all of the Irish traditions, certainly. That's all I have.
Oh, thank you. I said that's a lot. Thank you, Mary. It's always nice to have the wisdom imparted by the leaders, the long-term leaders of our organization. We do appreciate your input, Mary. As you probably know, if you're familiar with Marco, Mary is a past president. Chip N5RTF is a past president. And their participation goes on. That's the beauty of a strong organization. So those are that are members in ham radio clubs. That's the template that we use. Is we spread the work out so it's no burden on any one person, that they can enjoy their participation and then continue on when they're through with their leadership and have continuity in leadership. And we thank Barry WB1FFI, who's here with us today too, for his current leadership as president. Thank you very much, Barry. So, this pharmacology also, in talking about the industry, we're talking about the education, Mary, and from the Catholic standpoint and having that discussion, it certainly brings to mind that things do change over time, and societies develop, and we blend together, and somehow we learn to tolerate our mixed families here from different backgrounds. Mary, as a dentist, I use that mixed family line quite extensively. I have to be very careful politically what I say, because if I see somebody with really bad malocclusion, their jaws just don't line up. I politely explain it to the patient in front of the students. You're a product of a mixed marriage. You had one parent with a big lower jaw and one with a small upper jaw. So you can joke about these things in proper context, but we can laugh it off a little bit now, because a lot of this pain is dissipating with every generation. With students, we have a lot of first generation students from the Indian subcontinent, from Vietnam, and second generation students, and you can just see that mature. For the dental schools back in the mid 20th century, a lot of the students were Jewish. You expected to go on and be a doctor from families. That was the pressure. And of course, now it's moved more toward the financial industry, and we're seeing greater numbers of, thankfully, women and individuals from those two areas of the world that we just talked about, the Indian subcontinent and from Asia proper. And that's a joy. But getting back into the pharmacology industry and the education levels and the changes that occur over time, and knowing that we have all this education level, there's an article that I pulled and I read, and it's from www.cso.ie. And if you look that up and look for the Irish language in education, the level of education, this particular article talked about the changes from 1991 to 2022 in educational attainment of people of 15 years, and improved steadily during that time, because there was a time at the beginning where 14% of the population aged 15 and over just did not have much education, and not even out of primary school. And that, of course, increased greatly by the end in 2022, pretty much tripled in terms of the level of education. And we talked about 4.5 million people. Brought up a chart that was online and printed it out, and we're seeing very high percentages of individuals that had either upper secondary school or beyond with graduate degrees. Long story short, that obviously has an effect on the workforce and the ability for multinationals to come in, and with the internet being what it is, to have holdings and operations in countries such as Ireland. It became a very popular destination, I believe, also with the financial industry as well. So as we celebrate St. Patrick's Day, this melting pot of Americana, and we have all the green, and we have these celebrations. Let's remember the humble beginnings that started in the 1850s, and probably before that, but certainly accelerated there. It's an Irish success story that transformed Ireland in the long run, because even though we had that short run of immigration, now the jobs are coming back to Ireland. Do we have any further comments? Is there anybody would like to follow up about that? This is Whiskey Bravo 5 Delta looking for comments. Okay, I'm very appreciative of everyone that's here today. We're fighting a storm line, probably thunderstorms here in the next hour. I haven't heard any crashes on the radio here in 20 meters. We'll be calling it shortly here. Next week, we're going to have a very important Grand Rounds in the next 2 weeks, actually. So for those of you that are listening here amateur radio operators in general. We're going to be talking about different topics that we might want to discuss for the next 3 months of the year. And those topics are some of them are going to be controversial in nature, and we're going to be looking for controversial subjects in medicine, hot topics, things that are of current need to discuss. And we'll make a list of those and generate a calendar when our ether comes out on April 1st. So next week, we're going to talk about the actual topics, just identifying them. And the following week, we'll start talking a little bit about the science behind it in a general way. As we mentioned earlier during today's net, when we have these on-the-air discussions, it's so important to have input from the general amateur community here in 20 meters, from people that come in through Zoom simulcasts. As we develop these discussion threads, each particular discussion thread probably branches off into many, many more. So please be prepared to be here next week on 20 meters. If you're again listening, not a member of Marco, it doesn't matter. We embrace all amateur radio operators, and we're a public service for amateur radio. If you've never seen our Healthcare Hams YouTube channel, check out our YouTube channel for some of the discussions that we've had in the past, some of the net forums and topics that we've all discussed as an amateur radio community. That being said, I'm going to give one last opportunity for late check-ins before I bring the net to a close. Make your call to Whiskey Bravo 5 Delta. No additional check-ins. I'm going to go ahead and close out the recording here on the Zoom side.